2,000 years ago, a Roman farmer near the coast of Spain knelt in front of two pits dug into the ground. One was steaming, fresh manure, straw. The sweepings off the barn floor just beginning to rot. The one beside it was quiet, dark, crumbly, and smelled like a pine forest after rain. That second pit is the reason he never once walked into a shop to buy something to feed his ground. His name was Columella, and he wrote down exactly what he did, so precisely that we can still read it, word for word, 20 centuries later. And the claim you've heard is that what he made in that dark pit is more powerful than any modern fertilizer. Today I want to actually test that claim, honestly, both where it's true and where it isn't, because the answer depends entirely on one question nobody asks. What do you mean by powerful? Let's dig into it. The claim. Setting up the real test. Here's the claim on the table, stated plainly. The fertilizer the Romans used, cured manure, compost, green crops turned under, wood ash, is more powerful than the bag of fertilizer you and I bought at the garden center last spring. Now, I could just tell you yes, the Romans were right, buy nothing, the ancients knew best, and a lot of videos do exactly that. But I'm not going to insult you, because if you've grown anything, you already know a bag of concentrated nitrogen makes plants jump in a way a handful of compost doesn't, at least not right away. So if I stood here and told you compost outmuscles synthetic fertilizer in a straight fight this August, you'd know I was selling you a story, and you'd be right to. So let's do something better than a slogan. Let's actually judge this the way you'd judge any two competitors, by defining the race first, because more powerful is meaningless until you say powerful at what? A sprinter and a marathon runner are both incredibly powerful, but put them in the wrong race and either one looks like a fraud. Same here. There isn't one race between compost and the bag. There are two. And a fertilizer can win one and lose the other badly. The first race is the sprint. How much does it grow for you this single season, right now, this one summer, pounds of fruit, height of plant, speed of green up? The second race is the marathon. What does it do to your soil over 5 years, 10, 20? Is the ground better or worse for having been fed this way? Same two competitors, the Roman way and the modern bag, running two completely different races. And the honest truth, the one that actually helps you decide what to do this weekend, is that they don't both win the same one. Most videos on this topic pretend there's only one race, the one their side wins, and hide the other. I'm going to show you both, honestly, and let you see exactly where each competitor's power actually lives. Let me start with the sprint, and I'm going to be straight with you about who wins it, even though it's not the answer the title wants. The sprint, and an honest correction. The sprint is a single season. One question. Which fertilizer puts more tomatoes on your plant this August? And I have to correct the title right here on camera because you clicked on more powerful than any modern fertilizer, and you deserve the truth over the thumbnail. For the sprint, this one season, raw yield, the modern bag is, if anything, the more powerful of the two. That's not me taking industry's side, it's just chemistry. A synthetic fertilizer is nutrients stripped down to their mineral form, water-soluble, instantly available, hitting the roots the moment you water it in. It's a shot of espresso. Compost and manure release their nutrients slowly. As soil organisms break them down over weeks and months, it's a slow, steady meal. If you define powerful as pounds of fruit off a single plant in a single summer, a well-timed bag of nitrogen will match the Roman method and often beat it out of the gate. Anybody who tells you a scoop of compost out-yields concentrated fertilizer in one season, head-to-head, is telling you a fairy tale. And here's the honest kicker, the one that should make you trust the rest of this video. We don't have to guess about this, because someone actually ran the experiment for 180 years. At a research farm in England called Rothamsted, on a field called Broadbalk, they've grown wheat in the very same ground every single year since 1843. It is the longest-running agricultural experiment on Earth. One strip fed only with aged farmyard manure. The strip right beside it fed only with the bagged minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Nearly 180 harvests, every one weighed and recorded, in an unbroken line older than most countries' governments. And over all those years, the grain yields off the two strips came out roughly even. Read that again, because it's the honest heart of this whole subject. The bag was not a fraud. The minerals grew wheat, year after year, decade after decade, right alongside the manure, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but broadly comparable. If a company had wanted to prove that synthetic fertilizer works, this experiment did it, in the plainest possible terms, for almost 2 centuries. That's the fact the miracle of the ancients videos quietly skip, and I'm putting it front and center, because a claim that can't survive its own best evidence isn't worth your time. So no, I will not stand here and tell you the Romans out-yielded modern fertilizer on the scoreboard of a single harvest, because the longest agricultural record in human history says they didn't, and I won't tell you a story the numbers don't back. On the sprint, it's a tie at best, and the bag arguably wins. If that were the whole story, the title would just be false, and we'd be done. But it's not the whole story, because those same 180 years say something else, something that changes everything, and it only shows up when you stop watching the plant and start watching the ground. That's the marathon, and that's the race the Romans were actually running. The marathon, the race the Romans were running. Here's the thing the Romans understood, that a bag of fertilizer will never do for you, no matter how much you spend. They were not feeding the plant, they were feeding the soil, and the soil fed everything else, this year and every year after. That distinction is the whole ballgame. So let me make it concrete, because feed the soil, not the plant, gets said a lot, and understood rarely. Picture what your plant actually eats. A root doesn't have teeth. It can only drink in nutrients that are already dissolved and in the right chemical form. Synthetic fertilizer skips every middleman and hands the root exactly that. Minerals, pre-dissolved, ready to drink, right now. That's why it's fast, and there's nothing evil about it. But notice what it bypasses. It feeds the root directly, and feeds nothing else on the way. Not the bacteria, not the fungi, not the earthworms, not the microscopic web of life that, in a healthy soil, is the thing that makes nutrients available in the first place. You've replaced the whole living kitchen with a feeding tube. It works, but the kitchen, unused, slowly falls apart over years of feeding only the plant and never that living world. The world thins out and fades. The mycorrhizal fungi, the threads finer than a hair that reach out through the soil and trade water and minerals to your roots in exchange for a little sugar, retreat under heavy mineral phosphorus. The earthworm channels close up. A soil fed for years on minerals alone grows the crop while you feed it. And then, the moment you stop, it just stops. Biologically, it's drifting toward a desert that happens to be productive as long as the bag keeps coming. A soil fed the Roman way does the exact opposite. It gets richer every year you work it. The organic matter builds up instead of burning off. The fungal network establishes and spreads its threads wider each season. The earthworms multiply and open drainage and air channels no tool you own could ever cut, pulling leaves down and turning the ground for you while you sleep. The microbes break down organic matter slowly and hand the plant its nutrients continuously, released in step with what the plant actually needs, when it needs it, warmed by the same sun that's driving the plant to grow, instead of arriving in one big soluble pulse the day you fertilize and then washing away in the next heavy rain. Think about that difference in delivery. The bag gives the plant a feast and then a famine, over and over. The living soil sets a steady table every single day. That's what Columella meant when he wrote that the earth does not grow old and does not grow tired if you feed it right, and that when your ground stops giving, that's not the land wearing out, that's the gardener falling down on the job. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing living soil, 20 centuries before we had the word microbiome to name it, and that Rothamsted experiment proves it in the one place the yields didn't. The strip fed on minerals grew its wheat and left the ground about where it found it. The soil there today holds roughly the organic matter it did generations ago. The strip fed on manure grew comparable wheat and built a completely different soil underneath it. Measurably darker, deeper, spongier, holding far more carbon and far more water, and teeming with far more life. The researchers can put numbers on it. The manured plots hold 2 to 3 times the soil organic carbon of the mineral plots after all those years. Same grain in the basket, radically different ground beneath it. One strip spent a century and a half staying level. The other spent it getting richer. That's not a small footnote. A soil with more organic matter holds more water, so it carries a crop further into a drought before it wilts. It drains better in a flood. It resists erosion. It needs less added fertilizer each year to do the same work, because it's releasing its own. The manure strip wasn't just growing wheat, it was building an asset, compounding it, harvest after harvest. And there's an American version of the same story. The Morrow plots at the University of Illinois, running since 1876, the oldest experiment field on this continent, teaching the same lesson in American dirt. The manure and the rotation built the life in the soil and cut how much fertilizer the ground even needed. So the Romans didn't win the sprint, they won the marathon. They built a soil you could hand to your grandchild in better shape than you found it, instead of a little worse. So that's the honest version of the title. Not more powerful this August, more powerful across a lifetime. Now let me show you the 4 things they actually put back to make that happen, because every one of them is free, and you can start this week. The 4 returns, the Roman method, made practical. 4 things. That's the entire Roman fertility program, plus 1 rule that ties them together. And I want you to know, this wasn't one clever farmer with a lucky idea. It was written down, tested, and written down again over 2.5 centuries. The oldest was a stern old soldier named Cato, whose little farm book is the oldest surviving piece of Latin prose from about 160 years before Christ. When someone asked him the secret of good farming, he answered, good plowing, and then, third, manuring. After Cato came Varro, and then Columella around the year 65, who wrote 12 entire books and devoted chapter after chapter to feeding the soil, and then Pliny the Elder, who collected everything Rome knew before dying when Vesuvius buried the towns below it. 4 men, 2.5 centuries, 1 message repeated over and over: put back what you take out. Modern science has since explained why each of their 4 returns works. Here they are. Return 1. Cured manure, never fresh. The Romans kept those 2 pits for a reason, and it's the same reason your county extension office will give you today. Fresh manure can burn your plants with its raw ammonia, it can carry pathogens, and it's loaded with living weed seeds that pass right through an animal, spread it green, and you're seeding your garden with 1,000 weeds you'll pull all summer. So the Romans let the pile sit and cook for the better part of a year, until the heat of its own decomposition killed those seeds dead and mellowed the whole thing into something safe, dark, and stable. We have a fancy name for that heat-driven process now: hot compost, and every extension office in the country tells you the same thing that old Roman knew. Let it finish before you feed it to your beds. And Columella was such a connoisseur, he actually ranked his manures the way some people rank wine. Bird droppings from the dovecot prized at the very top, then sheep and goat, then the big cattle. And modern testing backs the old man up, because grain-fed bird manure really is far richer in nitrogen and phosphorus than cow. You don't need a dovecot. You need the principle. Age it before you use it. If you can get rabbit or chicken manure from a neighbor or a farm market, compost it down first, never fresh on growing plants. Return 2. The organized pile. Everything goes back. Beside the manure, the Romans composted everything: kitchen scraps, fallen leaves, spent straw, crop trimmings, the ashes and sweepings from the hearth, layered in one organized heap and left under the sun for months to become dark, sweet-smelling humus. Pliny described finished Roman compost as black earth, heavy, that smelled like a forest after rain, which is exactly what a bag of good compost smells like when you open it today. What they made in that heap is chemically identical to the compost sold now in bags at the garden center, with one difference: theirs cost nothing. This is the heart of the whole system, and it's the easiest to start. A bin in the corner, an old trash can with holes punched in the base works. Kitchen scraps with no meat or grease, leaves, chopped prunings, shredded cardboard, turned every couple of weeks, and in 3 or 4 months you have dark, crumbly compost that smells like forest floor and cost you nothing but the scraps you were throwing away anyway. Spread a couple of inches over your beds and mix it into the top few inches in spring, and lay a thin layer as protective mulch in fall. This idea never really died, by the way. It went quiet, then came roaring back in the 20th century through composting pioneers and the whole organic movement. That was just Rome coming around again in new clothes. Return 3. Green manure, the free nitrogen factory. This is the most sophisticated thing they did, and my favorite. When a field was going to rest, the Romans didn't leave it bare. They sowed a crop like lupines, vetch, or clover, let it grow lush, and then cut it down and turned it into the soil before it flowered. They noticed the ground was always richer after these plants than before, without knowing why. It took until 1888 for two German scientists, Hellriegel and Wilfarth, to explain it. Plants in the pea and bean family carry little nodules on their roots, and inside those nodules, live bacteria that pull nitrogen straight out of the open air and lock it into the soil in a form the next crop can absorb directly. Stop and think about how strange that is. You grow a crop, you give nothing to the land, and the land ends up better off than before you planted. The Roman lupine was a free nitrogen factory, and the raw material was thin air, which nobody has ever managed to put a price on. And this is not a small effect. Our own sustainable agriculture programs, like SARA, document that a good stand of crimson clover, hairy vetch, or field peas grown over winter and turned under in spring can hand your next planting somewhere between 50 and over 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. That's a real number, it's free, and you grew it yourself. There's an American hero of this idea too, George Washington Carver, who told cotton farmers whose land was beaten dead to plant peanuts and cowpeas, legumes, to put the nitrogen back, and helped rescue the soil of the whole American South doing it. Same Roman idea, different century. For you, sow a cover crop this fall on any resting bed, cut it down as it begins to flower, and let it feed the ground. Return 4. Wood ash. And here I have to slow down and warn you. The Romans spread wood ash for the potassium and calcium, which are real nutrients your plants genuinely want. Potassium especially helps a plant manage heat and drought stress. There's even lovely history buried in it. The word potash, and then potassium itself, comes from pot ash, the plain act of soaking wood ashes in a pot of water to draw the good stuff out. The first patent the United States ever granted, signed by George Washington himself in 1790, was for a better way to make potash from hardwood ashes. The ash in your great-great-grandmother's fireplace was once literally the first industrial chemical of a new nation, and at bottom it was plant food. But this is the one return that comes with a safety label the hype videos leave off. So hear me clearly, because this is where careless advice actually hurts your garden. Wood ash raises your soil's pH. It makes the soil more alkaline, sweeter, as the old-timers said. A light dusting on sour, acidic ground is a fine thing. Too much is a real problem, and unlike an overdose of compost, which does nothing bad, an overdose of ash can throw your soil chemistry off for a couple of seasons and lock up nutrients, so do not dump buckets of it around. A thin dusting, worked in once a year at most, and ideally only after a soil test tells you your ground is actually acidic and could use it. If your soil is already neutral or alkaline, skip the ash entirely, you'll do more harm than good. Keep it well away from the acid lovers, blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, because those plants want sour soil and the ash will make them miserable. And one hard rule I want you to hold on to: only ever use ash from clean, natural firewood. Never painted wood, never pressure-treated lumber, never the ash from a trash fire. That kind of ash carries genuine poisons, heavy metals, and worse, that you do not want anywhere near food you're going to eat. Used carefully and sparingly, wood ash is a real Roman tool. Used by the bucketful off a burn pile, it's a way to wreck a bed. Respect the difference, and the rule that ties them together. Rotation. The Romans never planted the same crop in the same spot 2 years running. Columella wrote it as a rule, not a suggestion. Each crop pulls different nutrients and leaves different ones. Tomatoes and peppers drain phosphorus and potassium. Legumes add nitrogen back. Deep roots like carrots break up the lower soil. Each rotation resets the balance and starves out the pests and diseases that build up when a crop repeats. Rotate your beds in groups. 1 year fruiting crops, the next legumes, the next roots, the next leafy greens, and the soil balances itself for free. The honest verdict. Is it more powerful? So let's finally answer the title, honestly, now that we've run both races. Is the Roman fertilizer more powerful than any modern fertilizer? For the sprint, this one season's yield, no. The bag is a tie or a win. 180 years of the most careful data in agricultural history say so, and I won't pretend otherwise to make the title feel better. If someone tells you compost beats concentrated fertilizer in a one-summer yield contest, they're choosing the story over the evidence. But for the marathon, for what your soil actually becomes over years, for a ground that produces more every season instead of quietly less, that holds water through a drought that flattens your neighbor's beds, that resists erosion, that needs less bought input each year because it's feeding itself, that you can hand to the next person richer than you found it. The Roman way isn't just more powerful. It's playing a game the bag can't play at all. The bag feeds a plant for a season and leaves the soil where it found it. The Roman method feeds a living world that compounds, quietly, harvest after harvest, into something no product can bottle. So the title turns out to be true. You just have to measure power the way the Romans did, in decades and inheritances, not in one August. And I want to be straight about why you weren't taught this, because the hype videos reach for a conspiracy here, and I won't do that to you. Nobody buried this knowledge. It's not hidden. It's written down, freely readable, 2,000 years old, sitting in libraries the whole time. The plain reason is simpler and a little sadder than a plot. Nobody can patent a compost pile. Nobody can put a bag around a fall-sown clover crop, slap a logo on it, and sell it back to you every single spring. There's no money in teaching a person to make their own dirt out of the scraps they already have. So the knowledge that cost a company nothing to let you forget quietly slipped out of the advertising, out of the store displays, out of the advice you get from the young man steering you toward the shelf, not hidden by a villain, just not sold by anyone. And a thing nobody profits from selling has a way of disappearing from the conversation. That's not sinister, it's just how attention follows money. And here's where I'll part ways with even the more honest videos on this topic. Some of them do tell you the truth about all this, and then, at the very end, hand you a free guide with a little code on the screen to scan, a cover crop chart, an ash safety card, in exchange for your email. I'm not going to do that, and I want to name why. Because it matters. The entire Roman point is that you already own everything you need. It's in your kitchen scraps, your fallen leaves, the prunings you were going to bag up and drag to the curb. If I turned around and made you scan a code to get the real version, I'd be doing a gentler version of the exact thing this video is criticizing. There's nothing here to sell you. That's not a marketing choice. That's the whole idea. The how. Start this week. So here's the whole thing. Small enough to start this weekend without buying a single thing. Start a pile, a corner of the yard, a ring of old wire, an odd bin, whatever you've got. Kitchen scraps with no meat or grease, plus your leaves and trimmings, turned now and then. In a few months, you'll have that dark, sweet-smelling crumble, and you won't have paid a dime for it. Keep your soil covered. This is the easiest move of all, and it's the one that saves your back. Rake your fall leaves right onto the beds as a thick blanket and let them lie. The worms come up to eat and do the digging for you while you rest. No tilling required. When you cut something back, let the trimmings fall right where they are, chop and drop. This fall, before the ground hardens, scatter a handful of clover or field peas or winter rye across any bed that's resting. Let it green up and hold the soil through the cold, and turn it under in spring. That's your free nitrogen factory, the Roman lupine wearing modern clothes. Once a year, if you've got clean wood ash and a soil test says your ground is acidic, a light dusting worked in, kept well away from the blueberries, and rotate. Never the same crop in the same spot 2 years running, so the ground never gets bled of the same nutrient over and over. 5 moves, and not one of them needs a store. And don't think for a second this isn't for you if you garden small. It all scales down. A coffee can of finished compost worked into a pot, a pinch of clover seed in a raised bed over winter, a blanket of chopped leaves over the top. The soil in a container is every bit as alive and every bit as grateful as an open field. Rome fed an empire this way, and it'll feed the tomatoes on your back step exactly the same way. Here's what I want to leave you with, and it's bigger than fertilizer. That farmer kneeling by his 2 pits has been dust for 2,000 years, long since returned to the very soil he spent his life feeding. He never met us and never knew that half a world and 20 centuries away, somebody would be standing here doing the exact thing he wrote down at those pits. But that's the quiet grace of feeding the soil instead of buying from it. You're not really tending a garden, you're tending a conversation older than Rome itself, one the industry interrupted for a few generations, and that you can pick right back up any morning you choose. Every time you open a compost bin, every time you turn under a cover crop before it flowers, every time you rake leaves onto a bed instead of bagging them for the curb, you're rejoining it, and you get to pass the ground along a little richer than you found it. The soil you feed this year will feed hands that haven't been born yet, and that might be about the finest thing a person can leave behind. So go start your pile. Not because a bag doesn't work, it does, for a season, but because the Romans weren't running that race. They were running the long one, the only one that ends with soil worth inheriting. And now, so are you.